An old man kneels at a pile of stones in a place with no name. There is no city here. No well. No road that leads anywhere a person would want to go. Just wind and rock and a silence so complete you can hear your own heartbeat in your ears. And this old man, his hands shaking, whether from age or from what he has just lived through, you cannot tell, is carving something into the stone. A word, a name. He will not tell you which name. Not yet. He carves it slowly, the way a man carves something he never wants to forget. And when he finishes, he sits back on his heels in the dirt, and he weeps. We will come back to this altar. We will find out who he is and what he carved and why his hands are shaking. But not yet. Because to understand that name, you first have to understand something almost nobody gets right. For thousands of years, people have collected the names of God the way a child collects stones in a pocket. They line them up. Elohim, Yahweh, El Shaddai, Adonai. They memorize them for a quiz. They print them on posters. They treat them like vocabulary words in a dead language, beautiful, ancient, and completely disconnected from anything that has ever kept a real person alive at 3 in the morning. And that is the mistake, because here is what most people miss. Not one of these names was handed down as a definition. Not one of them fell out of the sky as a doctrine. Every single name of God in the Bible was born in a crisis. Every one. It came to a specific person on a specific day, in the specific moment, when they were absolutely certain that God had forgotten them. This is not a study about vocabulary. This is not a list of Hebrew words to memorize for Sunday school. This is not a lecture about ancient languages nobody speaks anymore. This is the story of a God who kept leaning down into the desert, into the winepress, into the waiting room, and telling terrified people his name at the exact moment they had given up on hearing it. A man on a mountain, with a knife in his hand, learns one name. A slave woman, pregnant and alone, dying of thirst, learns another. A murderer hiding in the wilderness hears a voice come out of a bush that burns but will not burn up, and he asks that voice a question that changes history. He asks, "What is your name?" Watch what happens when God answers. Because by the time we reach that old man at the altar again, and we will, you are going to understand something you may have never understood before. You do not learn the name of God in the good times. You learn his name in the place you would give anything not to be. That is where he tends to introduce himself. Start at the very beginning, before the crisis, before there was even anyone left alive to be afraid. The first time we meet God in the Bible, we do not meet a doctrine. We meet a verb. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And the name used there, the very first name given to him in all of Scripture, is Elohim. Here is the strange thing about it. In Hebrew, Elohim is plural. It carries the ending you would put on a word that means gods, more than one. But every verb attached to it is singular. He creates. He speaks. He separates the light from the dark. One God, in a name shaped like a fullness too big for the singular to hold. The grammar itself is straining under the weight. It is the name of a God, so vast that the language cracks a little just trying to say him out loud. And what does this vast God do first? He speaks light into a place where there was none. Think about that for a second. He does not fight the darkness. He does not wrestle it, or negotiate with it, or wait for it to weaken. He simply speaks, and the dark has to get up and leave the room. That is Elohim, the God of raw, unhurried, effortless power. The one who was already there, before there was even a place to be. But here is the problem with a God like that. Power on its own keeps you at a distance. You can admire a God who flings galaxies into the black. You can stand under a night sky and feel very small beneath him. What you are not sure of, what you cannot quite believe, is that a God that big would ever bend down low enough to learn your name. So keep watching, because the next great name does not come from a mountaintop of glory. It comes from the backside of a desert to a man who was running from his own life. His name is Moses, and you have to understand who he really is in this moment, because it looks nothing like the statue you have in your head. He is 80 years old. 40 years before this, in a flash of rage, he had killed a man and buried the body in the sand, and then he ran, and he has been running ever since. He is not a prince anymore. He is not a deliverer. He is a hired shepherd tending another man's sheep in a wilderness called Midian, about as far from anything that matters as a human being can get. If you had met him that morning, you would have seen a tired old man with a stick and a flock, a man whose biggest dreams were 4 decades dead and buried in the same sand as his secret. And then, one ordinary afternoon, he sees a bush on fire. Now, bushes catch fire in the desert. That is not the strange part. The strange part is that this one keeps burning and does not burn up. The flames climb through the branches, and the branches do not blacken. The fire does not consume it. And when Moses turns aside to look, the very moment he turns, and not 1 second before, a voice comes up out of the middle of the fire and calls him by name. The voice tells this 80-year-old runaway that he has heard the cries of his people down in Egypt, that he has seen every lash of the whip, that he has counted every tear of every slave, and that he is now sending Moses back down into the very place he fled to bring an entire nation out of chains. And Moses, who remembers exactly how his last attempt at rescuing anybody ended, starts hunting for the exit. He stalls, he argues, and then he asks the one question that unlocks everything that follows. He says, "When I go to these people and tell them the God of their fathers has sent me, and they turn and ask me, 'What is his name?' what am I supposed to tell them?" Pay attention to this. It may be one of the most important sentences God ever speaks in the entire Old Testament. God answers, "I am who I am. Go and tell them that I am has sent you." In Hebrew, this is the name we spell with 4 letters, Y-H-W-H. Yahweh, and it grows straight out of the verb haya, which simply means to be, not I was, not I will be someday. I am, right now, always right now, a God with no beginning trailing off behind him, and no ending waiting to catch up in front of him. Every other thing that exists on borrowed being, a star, a mountain, you, me, all of it here only because something else brought it into being and holds it there. This is the one being in all of reality, who simply is, the ground underneath the ground, the one who was quietly holding up the whole universe the entire time Moses was busy running from his past. And the name was so holy that, within a few centuries, the Jewish people would stop saying it out loud at all. The historian Josephus, writing in the 1st century, brings up this name and then refuses to spell it, telling his readers only that it is something concerning which it is not lawful for him to say more. They would swap in a different word rather than let those 4 letters cross their lips. Once a year, only once, the high priest was permitted to speak it aloud, alone, deep inside the innermost room of the temple, on the single day set aside to carry the sins of the entire nation. That is how much weight this name came to hold. And where was it first given? Not to a king on a throne. To a stuttering, sunburned fugitive standing barefoot in the dirt beside a burning bush. Do you see the pattern already starting to form? The most powerful name in the universe was not delivered to the powerful. It was handed to a man at the absolute lowest point of his life. There is one more name in this first stretch, and it comes to a man even older than Moses. His name is Abraham, and he is 99 years old the day he hears it. God had promised this man a son decades earlier, and there is still no son. 99 years old, married to a woman nearly his own age, both of their bodies long past the age when such a thing is possible. And God comes to him and says 4 words that would sound almost cruel to a man in his position. I am El Shaddai. We usually translate it God Almighty, but the older sense buried underneath the word carries something far more tender than that. The God who is enough. The God who is sufficient precisely when your own body has run completely out of options. When the plain math of your life says the thing you were promised can no longer happen, and everyone around you has quietly stopped hoping for you. To a man whose every natural reason for hope had dried up and blown away, God does not say, "Come on, try harder." He says, "I am the God who is enough. I myself will be the strength your body no longer has. And within the year, against every law of biology, against every reasonable expectation, Abraham is holding a son in his arms. 3 names. 3 men standing at the very end of themselves. A God of power. A God who simply is. A God who is enough. And we have barely even started. So before we go any further, let me say the quiet part out loud, because you are probably already feeling it. Every name so far has arrived at the worst possible moment. The runaway at the bush. The childless man at 99. Notice that God never introduces a new name of himself when everything is fine. He does it when a person has hit the wall. The name is not information. The name is rescue, wearing letters. And if that is landing on you right now, if you can already feel which of these names you have needed and did not have a word for, then do 2 quick things for me before we keep going. Subscribe, so the rest of this does not disappear from your feed halfway through. And leave 1 comment. Just tell me the name you already knew before you press play. Elohim, Yahweh, El Shaddai, whichever one you came in already carrying. Because the next 4 names are going to find people in even darker rooms than these. And one of them was given by the last person in the Bible you would ever expect God to let name him. Stay with me. I want you to meet the woman who did something no one else in the entire Bible ever did. Her name is Hagar, and she is nobody. That is not me being cruel. That is exactly how her world saw her. She is an Egyptian slave, the property of another woman named Sarah. When Sarah could not have a child, she handed Hagar to her husband like handing over a tool to produce an heir. And when Hagar became pregnant and the tension in that household boiled over, Sarah turned on her so harshly that this pregnant slave woman did the only thing she could think to do. She ran into the desert, alone, carrying a child, with no plan, no water that would last, and nowhere on earth that was hers to go. Sit in that for a second. She is a slave, so she has no rights. She is a woman in the ancient world, so she has no standing. She is pregnant, so she is slow and vulnerable. She is foreign, so she has no people to run home to. And she is now sitting by a spring in a wilderness called Shur, doing the math on how long a person lasts out here, waiting to die. If there was ever a human being God would be excused for overlooking, by every standard her world could measure, it is this one. And that is the exact person the angel of the Lord comes and finds. He finds her by the water. He calls her by name, Hagar, servant of Sarah, which means someone knew her name in a world that had reduced her to a function. He tells her to go back, and he makes her a promise about her son that echoes the very promises he had made to the powerful people who owned her. And something breaks open in this woman. Here is the part almost nobody tells you about this scene. Hagar responds by giving God a name. Let that sink in. In all of Scripture, with all its patriarchs and prophets and kings, all the men who built altars and heard voices, the only person who ever gives God a name is a pregnant, runaway, foreign slave woman dying of thirst in the sand. She calls him El Roi, the God who sees me, and then she says the line that should stop you cold. I have now seen the one who sees me. She did not name him the God who is powerful. She had never doubted he was powerful. She named him the God who sees, because the thing she was actually dying of was not thirst. It was being invisible, and in the one moment she was most sure that not a single soul in the universe knew or cared that she existed, the God of the universe walked out into the desert to tell her that he had been watching the whole time. If you have ever felt unseen, passed over, forgotten, a function to the people around you instead of a person, that name was carved for you. El Roi, he sees you, but the names keep coming, and they keep meeting new kinds of pain. Move forward to a whole nation this time. The slaves are finally free. Moses has led them out of Egypt, through a sea that stood up like walls, and now more than 1 million people are walking into a desert with no supply lines and no map. 3 days in, they are desperate for water, and they find some relief until they taste it. The water at a place called Mara is bitter, undrinkable. 3 days of desperate thirst, and the only water they find turns to poison in their mouths. The whole nation turns on Moses. And God shows Moses a piece of wood, tells him to throw it into the water, and the bitter water turns sweet. Then he speaks a name over the moment. I am Yahweh Rapha. I am the Lord who heals you. The God who takes what is bitter and makes it drinkable. The God who meets you at the poisoned well of your own life and does something to it that you could not do yourself. Keep going, because now the stakes climb from thirst to blood. Not long after, a raiding nation called Amalek attacks the Israelites in the wilderness, attacks the stragglers, the weak, the ones at the back, who could not keep up. The first war. And as the battle rages, Moses stands on a hill with his hands raised, and as long as his hands are up, Israel prevails. His arms give out. Of course they do. He is an old man. So two men stand on either side of him and hold his arms up for him until the sun goes down and the battle is won. And Moses builds an altar and names it Yahweh Nissi. The Lord is my banner. In the ancient world, the banner was the standard you rallied around in the chaos of a battle, the thing you looked up to find, so you would know you were not fighting alone. God is saying, when the fight comes, I am the thing you look to. I am the flag still standing above the smoke. And then, one more name in this stretch, and it goes to a coward. I mean that as a kindness, because it is how he saw himself. His name is Gideon. He is the youngest son of the weakest family in one of the smallest tribes. And when we meet him, he is threshing wheat down inside a winepress, a pit, hiding, so the Midianite raiders, who have been terrorizing his people, will not see his grain and take it. That is where he is, in a hole in the ground, afraid. And the angel of the Lord sits down under a nearby tree and says to this trembling man hiding in a pit, the Lord is with you, O mighty man of valor. Gideon almost laughs. Mighty man of valor? He is hiding in a hole. He argues. He asks where all the miracles his grandparents talked about went. He asks for sign after sign. He is, by any honest measure, terrified. And what does God do with a terrified man? He does not shame him. Gideon builds an altar, and he names it Yahweh Shalom. The Lord is peace. Not the Lord is disappointed. Not the Lord demands you get it together. The Lord is peace, spoken over the most anxious man in the story, while he is still shaking, before he has done a single brave thing. For more names: a slave, a nation, a soldier, a coward, and a God who keeps showing up not where the strong are winning, but exactly where the weak are certain they are about to lose. Before we get to the mountain, two quieter names, because not every crisis is loud. The first comes from a man who started exactly where Gideon was hiding, out in the fields, tending sheep. His name is David, and before he was a king, before he was a giant killer, he was a shepherd boy on the hills outside Bethlehem, spending his nights between his flock and the wolves. And when that boy grew old, and had been hunted, and had buried people he loved, and had made a wreckage of parts of his own life, he picked up a pen and wrote down the name he had learned out there in the dark with the sheep. Yahweh Rohi. The Lord is my shepherd. He used the exact word he would have shouted at his own frightened animals. He was saying, I know what a shepherd does at 3 a.m. when a lamb is lost, because I was that shepherd, and that is what God is to me. The second comes from the far end of the darkest book. The prophet Ezekiel is not home. He is a captive hundreds of miles from Jerusalem, sitting by a canal in Babylon, with the rest of a broken, exiled people who have lost their city, lost their temple, lost the sense that God was anywhere near them at all. And at the very end of a long and often terrifying book, God gives the exiles one final name, the last name of the entire vision. He says the name of the city will be Yahweh Shammah. The Lord is there. To people who were dead certain God had left the building, his parting word is, I am there. Even here, even in exile, there. And now we go back to the altar. You remember the old man, the one carving a name into stone with shaking hands in a place with no name, weeping. It is time you knew who he is. He is Abraham. And this is not the day he heard El Shaddai. This is years later, on the worst morning of his entire life. Because the God who had finally, miraculously, given him a son, the son he waited 100 years for, had just asked him to carry that boy up a mountain called Moriah and give him back. A 3-day walk, 72 hours, with the boy alive beside him and the knife wrapped in the pack, and no way to explain any of it. They climb for 3 days, and Abraham does not sleep on any of them. He lies down each night beside a boy who is breathing slow and easy in the dark, the untroubled sleep of a child who trusts his father completely, and Abraham listens to that breathing, and he cannot close his eyes. 3 nights. On the 3rd day, the boy carries the wood on his own back up the last of the slope, and somewhere near the top he looks up at his father and asks the question that must have split Abraham in two. The fire and the wood are here, but where is the lamb? And Abraham, who has not been able to say one true word in 72 hours, says the only thing his shattered faith can still hold on to: God will provide. They reach the top. The altar goes up, stone by stone, and at the very last second, the knife already raised, a voice from heaven stops his hand. And Abraham looks up, and there, caught by its horns in a thicket, is a ram, a substitute, something to die in the boy's place. And that is the name he carves into the stone with his shaking hands, weeping: Yahweh Yireh, the Lord will provide. He did not learn it in the good years. He learned it with a knife in his hand on the worst morning he ever lived. God provided the lamb at the last possible second, not one moment sooner. Now hold that image, because I want to take you somewhere modern for just a moment. Picture a hospital waiting room at 3 in the morning. The vending machine light, the bad coffee. Someone you love is behind a set of doors you are not allowed through. And I want you to notice what you do in that room. You do not sit there and comfort yourself with abstract theology. Nobody in that chair whispers to the ground of all being or the uncaused first cause. That is not what comes out of a human being in the dark. What comes out is a name. You call one, because a name is the one thing you can actually cry out. And every single name we have walked through tonight was given to somebody in a room just like that one. Which brings us to the last thing, and it is the thing every one of these names was quietly reaching toward the whole time. 1,500 years after the burning bush, a carpenter from Nazareth is standing in the temple in an argument with religious leaders, and he says something that should have gotten him killed on the spot. He says, "Before Abraham was, I am." In Greek, ego eimi. He does not say, "Before Abraham was, I existed." He reaches back across all those centuries and picks up the exact name that came out of the fire, I am, and he puts it on his own lips, in his own mouth, about himself. This is not a story about vocabulary. This is not a story about a list of ancient words. This is not a story about a God who is far away and hard to spell. This is the story of a God who took every name: the God of power, the God who is enough, the God who sees, the God who heals, the God who provides, and gathered all of them into one body and one name you can say, without a high priest and without a holy day. Because when that same God was born into the world, the name they were told to call him was Emmanuel. God with us, not God above us, not God watching us, God with us, in the waiting room, on the mountain, in the desert, in the winepress, and the exile. There, just like he promised. If you forget everything else tonight, keep these. Start with what is simply true. Every name of God in the Bible is tied to a moment, not a dictionary. He did not hand down a glossary. He walked into a fire, a desert, a winepress, a mountain, and an exile, and he told real people who he was in the language of what they needed right then. The names are not definitions. They are testimonies. Each one is somebody's worst day, with God's answer written across it. Then there is the part that is for you. The name of God you most need is almost always revealed in the place you least want to be. Hagar found the God who sees in the desert she ran to in despair. Abraham found the God who provides on the mountain he dreaded climbing. You will probably not learn the deepest names in the easy season. You learn them in the waiting room. So if you are in one of those rooms right now, do not assume God is absent. That may be the exact place he is about to tell you his name. And this is the one I most want you to hear. You are not standing around waiting for God to finally show up and prove he is real. In Jesus, he already told you his last name. Not power from a distance, not a voice from a burning bush you have to travel to. Emmanuel, God with us. He came all the way down into a body, into a family, into a world exactly as broken as yours, so that the God who sees and heals and provides and is enough would no longer be a name you have to go find. He would be a person standing in the room with you. So let me ask you something, and I really do want your answer. Of every name we walked through tonight, the God who sees, the God who heals, the God who provides, the God who is peace, the God who is there, which one do you most need to hear right now? Not the one that sounds best, the one your life is actually asking for tonight. Comment it. Not for me, but for the person scrolling past who feels exactly the same and has not found the words yet. Because here is the whole thing in a single sentence. For every terrified person, in every impossible place, across every page of this book, God kept doing the same relentless thing. He leaned down. He said his name, and he has never once stopped. He still knows yours.